Hey guys. All right, so since I can't be with you today, I did a video lecture of what we would be covering today. Okay, so again, I'm going to be out today and tomorrow. So to keep us from getting too far behind, or rather to stay on track, we're going to do this today. Okay, so I hope you have the audio on because you're probably going to need it. Make sure you have your headphones in or your earbuds in. All right, because we're going to do this just like we would in class, okay? So make sure that you're taking notes as I go along with this to put into your notebook to study for the test. All right, so if you think back to Tuesday, we talked about the Industrial Revolution, and we talked about some of the negative impacts. We talked about the whole aspect in regards to a typical workday or work week. On average, people spent 6 days a week and 14 hours a day at the job. Okay, typically 84 hours a week. And as we talked about on Tuesday, you also had child workers. It wasn't just for grown men; it was also for women and children as well. So what we're going to do here for this lecture, at least for the next few minutes, is that we're going to look at the life of a child worker during this point in time during the Industrial Revolution. We talked about some of the reform put in place by Great Britain in the 1830s. And that reform was put in place due to a number of interviews. Once the British government got word that some things were happening that shouldn't have been happening, then they did an investigation. And they interviewed a lot of people in regards to factory workers, factory owners, and that included men, women, and children. And what I'm about to show you comes from one of those cases. It's an interview from a child named William Cooper. William Cooper testified in 1832 about his time as a child laborer. William began working when he was just 10 years old, and his sister, who was a little bit older, worked in the same factory upstairs. So what I'm about to show you is a story of William Cooper and his sister. Okay, so we're going to start off with 5 o'clock in the morning. 5 a.m. is where we're going to start. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Cooper's workday begins. All right, Cooper's workday begins. I hope that you can read that on the board. His workday begins. Now think about that. It's not when he wakes up. It's not when he gets on the bus. It's when he clocks in to start work, which means that William is probably getting up closer to about 4 in the morning, depending on how far he lives away from the factory. Now, if he's one of these families where maybe it takes him 10, 15 minutes to get to work, then maybe he wakes up even earlier than that. If you're living in these big cities, more than likely you're walking everywhere. You're talking about a time period where you don't yet have subways, you don't have public buses, you don't have cars. And so you're having to walk everywhere that you go. So depending on how far away from the factory William and his sister lives, it may take them 15, maybe 30 minutes to walk to work, maybe even longer than that. So we can speculate that maybe he gets up more along the lines of 4 o'clock in the morning so that he can make it to work in time. Because after all, if he doesn't make it to work in time, then he risks the chance of losing his job. Again, these factory owners and factory managers, they didn't play around. If you weren't at work when you're supposed to, they could fire you because they had so many people lined up to fill in these jobs. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, William is beginning his shift, both he and his sister. At 12 p.m., 12 noon, all right, he gets a 40-minute meal break. All right. At 12 noon, he gets a meal break, or a lunch break rather, for 40 minutes. This is his only break all day. I want you to keep that in mind as we go further along. It is his only real break all day long. All right, so let's do the math here. He begins work at 5 o'clock in the morning. He takes his first break and his only break at 12 noon. How many hours is he working here? That's right, 7 hours, okay? 5 plus 7 is 12. So William has already been working for 7 hours before he gets a break, and again, this is for lunch. Again, think about the average American workday, again, which is about 8 hours long. That's for the typical average American worker. And so 7 hours in, you've almost put in an entire workday for the average American worker. And yet he's now just on his lunch. Okay, so he gets 40 minutes to eat. And again, it's his only lunch break of the day. So as we go further along, let's get to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, at 3 p.m., you're kind of getting into that lull point. Again, let's look at how long he's been working up to this point. 5 a.m. to 12, you got 7 hours. He gets 40-minute lunch, so he's been back at work for a good 2 hours and 20 minutes. And in total, he's put over 9 hours in already. So you can imagine at this point, he's getting tired, he's getting sleepy, he's getting worn out. Well, whenever that happened, then you would have the adult managers who would come around and they would actually whip them back to work. Okay, if you were caught slacking on the job, then what they would do is that they would find any means necessary to put you back to work, which typically meant that they came around and either whipped you or beat you or something to make sure that you went back in line. And again, keep in mind that Cooper was only 10 years old when he started working. So can you imagine a 10-year-old working a 9-hour shift and then being whipped for maybe going a little slower because he was worn out? All right, so the next time stamp that we have here is 6 o'clock in the evening. All right, 6 p.m., he gets to eat dinner. All right, so again, let's do the math and look at how long William has been working up to this point, okay? 7 hours, 40-minute break. All right, but let's just put it all together, okay? Let's say 5 to 3, okay, 7 plus 3, that's 10 hours. Another 3 hours, that's 13 hours, right? Or am I doing my math wrong? That's 7, that's 10, 13 hours. And with the exception of the 40-minute break, you're looking at 12 hours and 20 minutes that he's already put in so far. And it's not that he's getting off work; it's that he's eating his dinner. Now let's think about this as well. Let's go back to right here. This was his only break of the day. So how is he going to eat dinner? Well, he's going to eat it on the run, or basically eat it while he works. If you look at a lot of people who are just on the go, nonstop working, then they have to do what's called eating on the run, which means that they're eating, but they're working at the same time, or they're doing this or they're doing that. Now, the thing about that is that when you eat on the run like that, or you're doing something while you're eating, then typically you're burning calories while you're putting calories into your body. And so it doesn't take too long down the road before you look up and you think, I'm hungry again. All right, so again, William has already been working for right at 13 hours anyway, and so he's getting to eat dinner while he works. And so probably whatever he's eating is, which is probably not much anyway. If he's 10 years old and he's having to work for his family, it means that they're probably really poor. So it's not like he's eating a 4-course meal here. He's probably eating the bare essentials, probably what we would call a snack. And so he's not getting a whole lot of food anyway, and yet he's putting in a 13-hour workday already and having to eat his dinner while he's working at the same time. At 9 p.m., Cooper's shift ends. William Cooper's shift ends. He is finally off work and can go home. Or at least that's what it appears. All right, so again, let's do the math here. He began work at 5 o'clock in the morning. He gets off at 9 o'clock at night. All right, so let's do the math. All right, again, 5 to 12 is 7. Another 3 is 10. Another 3 is 13. Another 3 is 16. Take out our 40-minute lunch, and he's worked more than 15 hours. All right, 15 hours and 20 minutes. 15 hours and 20 minutes is what William Cooper has worked. And again, he began doing this when he was just 10 years old. All right, now I'm not sure exactly how old he is here. He could be 12 years old. He could be 13. We're not really sure. All right, but again, this is somebody probably y'all's age. Maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older. Okay, but he works a 15-hour shift. Now, again, William is off work, but he doesn't get to go home yet because his sister is not off work. All right, so if William is not going to walk home by himself, then he has to wait for his sister. Okay, regardless, let's now focus to his sister. His sister also began work at 5 a.m. in the morning. His sister is still working, and at 11 p.m. at night, his sister's shift ends. All right, so William gets off at 9 o'clock at night. His sister has to work another 2 hours. Now, I'm not exactly sure how old his sister is. Maybe she's 15, 16, 17. Okay, but let's say that she's 17 years old. Okay, if William has worked 15 hours and 20 minutes, then she has worked 17 hours and 20 minutes. All right, she has worked at least 17 hours. So even if she's 17 years old, 17-hour work shift is astronomical. That is almost twice as much as a typical American workday. Again, if you look at 8 hours a day, really that's more than double. Okay, 8 times 2 is 16. So she has worked more than twice of the average American on any workday. Okay, and if you look at most Americans that many work 12-hour shifts. If you work in the medical field or other jobs, you might work a 12-hour shift, okay? She is still 5 hours past that. And so just think about that. We have adults in America who don't even work this many hours on a typical day, really on most special days. And yet you have teenagers who are working these kind of hours. All right, so William works 15 hours. His sister works 17 hours, and let's kind of go on from there. It's 11 o'clock at night, and let's say that William waits on his sister, okay, and so they're going to walk home, okay? It's 11 o'clock at night. Again, depending on where they live, it might take them 15, 20, 30, maybe even 45 minutes to walk home. So let's say 30 minutes, okay? 11 o'clock at 11:30 they get home, and you got to know that they're hungry. After all, it's 11 o'clock. The last time that they ate was 5 hours earlier. And not only 5 hours earlier, but they've been working nonstop. This is hard manual labor. This is very difficult work. You're burning off so many calories. And so whatever you might have eaten during the workday, you've already worked off. And so you get home and you're hungry, and if there is any food, then you probably eat maybe a snack or maybe even another dinner, and then try to get in bed. So let's say that all is said and done, between 11:30 at night and 12 o'clock at night, they finally get in bed. Have to be at work at 5 o'clock the next morning. So how many hours of sleep are they actually getting per night? Maybe 4 or 5 hours tops. And I do mean tops. If they went to sleep right, let's say his sister clocks out, they lie down on the floor there at the factory and they fall asleep right then, the most they could ever get is 6 hours of sleep. And so when we look at what these children went through, because I know you guys like to think that you're big and bad. Some of you maybe are. I don't know. But when you're 13, 14, 15 years old, working this kind of stuff here, that's rough. This is rough for grown adults who've been working their entire lives. And so imagine, again, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids. Because when you're talking about working these kind of hours, you guys are still kids. And so this is just horrible to think that that this is what kids your age were working at one point in time. Again, probably getting about 4 hours of sleep at night and doing this for maybe 5 or 6 days a week. Think about that. Okay? So I know that you guys don't like being here at school, or at least most of you don't anyway. But think about that. Think about that the next time you dread getting up in the morning. And that you may have to be here for 7 hours a day, listening, taking notes, trying to stay awake, but at least you don't have to do this right here. All right? Life doesn't look so bad at that point in time, does it? All right, now, and again, I know you guys, I know that some of you guys have it a little rougher than that, so I'm not trying to take anything away from that. But you look at this right here and what people had to go through back during the Industrial Revolution, and it was just sad. It was a sad case to where, again, this was pretty much on average, and this was an actual case. This is not an exaggeration to get my point across. This was an actual case, a kid named William Cooper, who was interviewed by the Parliament of Great Britain in 1832. All right, so if you go back and look at your notes that we went over Tuesday and looked at those reforms that we talked about, again, that's why we get all those different reforms. The British government realizes that there's something going on that shouldn't be happening, and so as a result, they began to pass laws and mandates to restrict child workers. So again, when you go back and look at the Factory Act, to where kids 13 to 17 couldn't work more than 12 hours a day, you say 12 hours, that's ridiculous. Well, look at what he had to do. 15 hours to 17 hours. 12 hours doesn't look so bad at that point in time. All right, and so as we go further along, we get more changes, we get more refund, or rather more reform. You get the 10 Hours Act of I think it was 1748 or 1848 one, to where it reduces the workday down to 10 hours for women and children. So again, you look at that just at the onset and think, man, that's a lot of hours. It doesn't really sound like a whole lot in regards to changes. But you look at what they were already going through. When you're working 15 and 17 hours a day, 10 hours and 12 hours, that's a big deal. Okay, it means that you get more time at home to sleep. It means that you get more time at home to eat. It means that you somewhat get to enjoy being a kid, which is what you guys need to do. Okay, you do your work, you work hard, and then you enjoy your life. Okay, so think about that the next time you think about your schedule. And some of you guys do have to go through a lot in regards to sports and schoolwork and home life and all that kind of stuff. And again, I'm not trying to take away from that, but this is certainly something to think about. This is very eye-opening, and these are very sad cases that people did these kind of things. And again, this happened in the United States as well. I'm not sure if it necessarily happened this bad in regards to the widespread efforts, but we get reform in the United States in the late 1800s and in the early 1900s because some similar things were taking place. People were getting taken advantage of, and so you had the formation of labor unions, and that's why labor unions were important back during this time period, is that it helped to stop stuff like this right here, to reduce the workday, to get better pay, to get better working conditions. I mean, more breaks in the day. And so labor unions during the Industrial Revolution were very, very, very important in helping to change these things, because they had a big impact not only on the factory owners, but even in regards to government. They had that kind of power to take it before Parliament and to take it before Congress to get changes. And so this pretty much covers the rest of Section 2 in looking at the life of a child worker. Now, if you guys work today, then you're going to notice a couple of things. Okay, first of all, this doesn't happen anymore in the United States because we have our own child labor laws. So when you guys go to get a job, hanging in the break room there should be a couple of different forms. There should be this one right here, which is the Alabama child labor laws. And this gives the restrictions of what employers can and cannot do in regards to teenage workers. All right, and I'll just read off a couple of things here. First of all, anybody under the age of 14 cannot work in the state of Alabama. Anybody under the age of 14 cannot work a regular job, otherwise it's illegal. All right, and I'll go ahead and say this, that ages 14 and 15, most companies don't even hire anymore because there are so many restrictions. I know that growing up, I had friends who were 15 years old, and they would work jobs for maybe the local grocery store or maybe somewhere smaller than that. But really, most people don't even hire 14 and 15-year-olds anymore because of the heavy restrictions. All right, so for example, for 14 and 15-year-olds, during the months when school is in session, you cannot work more than 3 hours a day after school, no more than 8 hours a day on a non-school work day, no more than 6 days per week, no more than 18 hours per week, and not before 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. each day, and not during school hours. So if you're 14 and 15 years old and you actually do have a job with a regular company, you cannot work more than 3 hours a day during a regular school day, no more than 8 hours a day on the weekends, no more than 18 hours a week, and not after 7 p.m. at night. All right, so again, there are a lot of limitations there. If you're 16 and 17 years old, then the limitations are not as bad. Okay, so I'm going to put this up again. During the times when school is in session, all right, minors 16, 17, and 18 who are enrolled in public or private school may not work after 10 p.m. or before 5 a.m. on any night preceding a school day. All right, so let's say that it's a work week. Okay, it's Thursday, and so tonight you have to work. You cannot work past 10 p.m. tonight if you have school tomorrow morning, and so there are not as many limitations as far as the amount of hours that you can work per week. You can really work 40 hours a week, and you can work 8, 10, 12 hours a day on the weekends. Okay. So there are not nearly as many limitations in regards to 16, 17, and 18-year-olds who are in school. But now each company also has their own regulations as well. Okay, this is the Alabama state labor laws, but each company has their own labor policies that goes beyond that. Some companies will not allow teenagers to work past 9 p.m. Some will not work you past 8 hours on the weekend, and so they have their own laws and policies that fit in with this. Okay, they're going to take this and they're going to go even further to make sure that that child workers are not taken advantage of. Okay, you will also probably see, or at least you should see, this poster right here. All right, now I'm going to get this a little closer. Now this poster is out of date. It is a few years old. Matter of fact, it's about 10 years old. All right, and you can tell that by looking at the minimum wage. All right, but this poster here, which again should also be posted in the break room of every employer, has a lot of things laid down in it. First of all, it has the minimum wage. All right, the minimum wage is the very minimum that your employer can pay you. Now, they can pay you more than that, but they have to pay you at least this much. As of right now, minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Okay, so again, this poster is a little old, and so it has the minimum wage from 2007, 2008, and then 2009. So anywhere that you go work today, you have to make at least $7.25 an hour because that's minimum wage. Now, again, companies and corporations have their own limitations. They have their own policies. And so some companies, their starting wage is much higher than this. I know that McDonald's and Walmart both have raised their minimum wage for their employees to like $9 or $10 an hour. Okay, but again, according to the state of Alabama, or actually this is federal government here. This is for the United States. Minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Okay, you also have other things up here in regards to overtime pay, youth employment, tip credits. You have the Employee Polygraph Protection Act, which I've never had to worry about this. You have the Equal Opportunity employment. You have the OSHA requirements for safety, such as you cannot work cardboard balers unless you're under the age of 18. You cannot use a box cutter if you're like 14 or 15 years old. All right, and then down here is the Family Medical Leave Act, the FMLA, for a family member who is sick. Okay, this is what we used a couple of years ago when my wife had our daughter. Okay, she was guaranteed time off work, and so was I, to care for our family. So if you go to work at a job, whether you're already working it now or whether you go to work at 16, 17 years old, okay, it is by law that these two have to be posted in at least a break room or somewhere else visible in the workplace. And unless that's changed over the last few years, which I seriously doubt it, this is by law. So if your employer does not have these posted, then make sure that they get them posted so that you know your rights, because that's exactly what these are, to where you know your rights as an employee, what they can and cannot do. Okay, so again, this is very important. As a matter of fact, I got these from 10 years ago when I was a manager at a grocery store, and we had these posted in our break room as well as next to the time clock, and we had an extra set of copies, and so I grabbed these too. Okay, but this is exactly what you should see up. So as we begin to conclude here on section 2 about the whole talk about child labor laws, okay, we go from this right here to that right there. To where here in the United States, we've gone through great lengths over the last 100 years or so to make sure that the workers are protected, so that when you guys go to work, again, whether it's 15, 16, 17, or 18, then you have your own set of protections as well, so that this right here doesn't happen. All right, any questions? Good. All right, now the last thing that we're going to do here is that Miss Watson should have passed out that worksheet right there. Okay, so let's get that out. We're going to go over it for just a minute or two. Okay, now there's also a back page to this. Okay, do not throw this worksheet away because you're going to need this page tomorrow. This is what you're going to be doing tomorrow, is that you're going to be reading section 4, I think. I'll check on that here in a second. And you're going to be filling in this chart. Okay, so don't lose this. All right, for today, this is section 3. All right, so very quickly, let's go through this right here. And this chart is pretty much, let me kind of adjust the camera here. There we go. This chart is kind of comparing and contrasting some of the changes of the Industrial Revolution between Great Britain and the United States. All right, so the 3 primary areas that we're going to look at here: transportation, population, and types of workers. Because we talked about the American Revolution a couple of chapters ago, and we're getting to the point as we go through the 1800s, the United States is beginning to make their mark in the world. Okay, they're not necessarily a world power yet, but we are really beginning to grow as a nation. And so as the Industrial Revolution is introduced to the United States, and the United States begins to grow in regards to industry and transportation, then that's really something to take note here. Again, the Industrial Revolution began in England. Okay, so let's start at the top. Transportation. All right, transportation. In 1830 in England, you had 320 miles of railroad track. 40 years later, in 1870, 11,000 miles of railroad track. All right, so the other day we talked about the invention of the locomotive and trains and train lines. All right, so in 1830, just a few years after you get the first train line, you have 230 miles of railroad track in that's in the United States. Okay, which is really not a whole lot. Okay, 230 miles in the United States is really not a whole lot. 40 years later, in 1870, 53,000 miles. Is that right? Yeah, 53,000 miles, okay? In England, we just said a second ago, in 1830 you had 320 miles, and then 40 years later, 11,000 miles. Okay, so we can compare and contrast the two. Okay, in 1830, both countries had about the same, about 200 or 300 miles, which in England would probably get you a lot further, but in the United States, not so much. 40 years later, in 1870, England added a lot to where you have 11,000 miles of railroad track, which will pretty much get you anywhere that you want to go in England. Again, keep in mind that the United States is really, really big, and so 11,000 miles in England is a lot. In the United States, 53,000 miles of railroad track. Now, in 1870, keep in mind that that's 5 years after the American Civil War. That is after we have expanded all the way to the West Coast, which we'll talk more about next chapter. And so 53,000 miles is a lot. But for the United States, it really doesn't even come close to covering every square mile of the country. Okay, that will get you from the East Coast to the West Coast in the Transcontinental Railroad. And again, it does a lot in regards to people moving out west and moving to certain parts of the country. Again, whether it's trade, whether it's moving, whether it's travel, people are able to go from major city to major city. Now, in the United States, also look at this right here, in that we also have steamboats. Now, you didn't have a lot of steamboats in England because they don't have a lot of rivers. We do here in the United States. So again, in 1807, you get the paddle wheel steamboat that's invented by Robert Fulton. All right, and by the time that we get to the year 1860, which is the year that the Civil War begins, there are more than 1,000 steamboats going up and down the Mississippi River alone. Okay, so the Mississippi River is the longest river in the United States. The point being here is that the rail lines are not just important here in the United States, but also steamboats because of our abundance of rivers. Again, the Tennessee River, the Mississippi River, Cumberland River, all these rivers all across the country. So not only do we have railroads, but we also have steamboats. So again, this means transportation. It means goods being traded back and forth. It makes that trading a whole lot easier. It means that people are moving back and forth a lot easier. It means that people are moving from one place to another. All right, so transportation, very, very important because of the invention of the steam engine, which leads to the locomotives and the steamboat. All right, let's also take a look at the population of the two countries. In England in 1830, you had 24 million people. 40 years later, in 1870, you have 31 million people. And in 1900, 41 million people. So if you look at the progression of England, again, population is increasing here. And so you go from 24 million in 1830 to 41 million in 1900. Now you say, well, that's 70 years. Of course you're going to have a lot of growth. Well, the point here is that the growth rate is really growing very rapidly. Not only is the population growing, but it's growing at a very rapid rate. But now you compare that with the United States and look at that chart with me. In 1830, the United States had 12.9 million. So England had 24 million, the United States had 12.9 million. In 1870, the United States had 38.6 million as compared to England's 31 million. So you see that we're already growing a good bit. I mean, that's a very rapid growth for the United States in just a 40-year period. And then in 1900, 76 million people in the United States as opposed to 41 million in England. So we had almost doubled the size of England by 1900. Okay, if we go back to 1830, England almost had twice the population that we did. 70 years later in 1900, we almost doubled their population. So again, the point of this is that England is growing a lot because of the Industrial Revolution, but look at the United States. We are really beginning to grow. Okay, we are growing and we are expanding. Okay, people are coming to the United States. They're immigrating to the United States from especially from Europe, but also from Asia and from Central America. And so you see that our population is really growing. This is the point of where, as a nation, we are really kind of getting into our niche here. Okay, as we get into the onset of the 20th century, World War I, World War II, and it is in between those time periods that we become the top producer of the world. Okay, you see that we're very quickly getting there in regards to population, and that is even with the War of 1812. I'm sorry, well, War of 1812 is a little before, but that is even with the Civil Wars I'm thinking of. That is even with the Civil War in 1860 that our population is still growing. Okay, and then in both countries you had again men, women, and children working in both the United States and in England. Okay, so this is a very, very quick compilation of Section 3, but it just really compares and contrasts how the Industrial Revolution is having an effect in England and how it's having an effect in the United States. And as we make this transition from this semester to next semester, and we get into the 1900s or the 20th century, then the focus is really going to go on us here in the United States, especially with the world wars, World War I, World War II, the Roaring '20s, the Great Depression, the Korean War, Vietnam. Okay, really, the focus comes to the United States in regards to a world power. So the 1800s, during the Industrial Revolution, we're seeing that transformation to where England was the most powerful nation in Europe, but yet here we come throughout the 1800s, and our population is growing. We're building tons of railroad track, a lot of steamboats. Okay, as a world power, we're getting there. All right, so thanks guys for listening. I've only taken about 30 minutes of your time here, so I hope that you've taken notes and have really paid attention, because I'm not going to come back to this again. Okay, this is it. So as I come back to this again if you need to, in order to take more notes or to study for the test. Okay, keep in mind that tomorrow you're going to be working on this worksheet right here, which, as far as I know, deals with Section 4. Give me 1 second. Yes, Section 4. Okay, so tomorrow, again, do not lose this worksheet on the back. You're going to the back page and read Section 4 to fill in these two columns on capitalism and socialism. Okay, and on top of that, once you do this, be ready for a mini debate on Monday. We're going to debate which one is better, capitalism and socialism, or capitalism or socialism. Okay, so that's your assignment for tomorrow, Friday. Make sure that you finish this so that we can talk about it on Monday and do our debate. Again, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and if nothing happens, I'll see you on Monday.